Today it's my great pleasure to welcome to the Mendable channel Josh Hill. Josh is an equestrian and he is a dressage competitor. Josh is also a role model for young male riders. He's created his own social media platform to promote positive change in the equestrian industry. He's a mental health advocate. He co-founded a clothing brand and is also the co-host of the Rein It In podcast channel, in which he invites other equestrians to share their experiences. So, Josh, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for sharing your experiences with me.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to it.
So when I look at your background and I look at what we do here at Mendable, I see a lot of parallels, because at Mendable, we're all about providing a safe space for people to share their mental health stories, their challenges, their struggles, and to come to us and have good support and the support of other people. And it seems like that's a lot of what you do. So a lot of things I'd like to ask you, but my first question is that anybody that looks through your social media, it's very hard to find a picture of you or a video of you without a horse being involved. So were you brought up around horses, or is this something that you discovered entirely on your own?
So I was brought up around horses from day one. My mum, my nan, they both rode. So yeah, it was just sort of part of my family, really. I knew no different. But I didn't actually start riding until I was 7, which is quite unheard of for someone that is sort of brought up around horses. Um, but yeah, I was very lucky to be brought up in that world. Um, I don't know who I'd be without that being such a huge part of my life.
And how did the competitive world start for you? Because I believe you've been somewhat competitor, dressage competitor. How did that all start for you?
Um, as most things, it started as a hobby, um, and it just sort of fell into it. I really enjoyed it myself. Sort of continued down the development pathways, which led me to committing to just doing dressage as a discipline, whereas a lot of young riders would be maybe doing multiple disciplines, whereas from the age of 12, I committed to doing dressage, and I ended up on the national training scheme, which is sort of the GB squad for pony riders, which is up until the age of 16. And then through that process, just kept developing, really. I went through ponies. I didn't quite make juniors and young riders. I was very lucky with the support from my parents, but my ponies that were bought for me, or horses that were bought for me, were youngsters, so we didn't have a massive budget to go buy really expensive horses. We were sort of, my dad was on a shoestring trying to balance everything, uh, and so we were sort of spending maybe up to £10,000 on a horse, which I'm very aware is a lot of money, but in comparison to the world that I was in, you're spending normally hundreds of thousands of pounds to buy these types of horses. So it was a very interesting world that I sort of fell into, which I then found extremely difficult because I was state educated. So my two worlds were so different, from where I was at school to where I was with my horses. It was universes apart. And I really struggled with my identity going through school during that process, and even in dressage, because I didn't feel like I belonged there, from being the only state educated person in the teams. Uh, yeah, it was a very interesting time.
So you've had your share of finding your own identity and really having to rely on the talent of what you could do to take you there, because you didn't necessarily have the contacts. It wasn't the who you knew. It was just the fact that you were good at what you did and you had to rely on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very lucky being a guy in the industry. There's not, especially at my age, there's not a lot of representation for young riders that are male coming through. So that I'm fully aware that worked to my advantage, and maybe I got more opportunities because of that. But yes, you are correct. Although my mum was horsey, she didn't have any sort of connections into the dressage world or anything along those lines. Like a lot of my friends, their parents were the trainers because they've ridden internationally for Great Britain at senior level, which it wasn't like that for me. But I wouldn't have changed that process uh, for anything because it made me such a better rider, which is why when I was sort of 16, I then dropped out of school and started to make a career from it,
Yeah.
and had a lot of success sort of in these sort of my late teens, early 20s.
And are you still competing now, or is that something that you've moved on from?
As of right now, I'm not. It's something that I will get back to at the right time. I I have my own sort of like journey, which is why I can really relate to coming on here. And I massively struggled with my mental health sort of from my late teens, early 20s. But I'm now 27 years old, and back then it wasn't something discussed. I wouldn't. This is would be so. You wouldn't think of a guy now coming on a podcast and talking about it 10 years ago. That would have been like, what on earth? I don't even think podcasts were a thing back then. But now it's brilliant that this can happen for people to share their own experiences. But for
Yeah.
me back then, I was so lucky with how my riding career happened, but that consumed me. I didn't know who I was without horses. I turned a hobby into a career that then had to pay. I had to earn a living from. So I lost the love of what was a hobby that I loved and a passion for it, to then it had to pay my bills, and that's a really weird transition that you have to go through. Um, and I just needed to go away for it and clear my head and work out who I was without the horses involved in my life. They're a huge part of my life. They always will be, but a lot of pressure was put on me from that. And actually, my relationship with my mum was very up and down because my relationship with my mum was solely depending on how well I was doing with my horses. If I was doing really well with the horses, because she supported me massively and I understand that, then mine and my mum's relationship was very good. I would get away with murder if I was doing well with the horses. But if things weren't going well with the horses, I had a bad competition, my mum wouldn't talk to me. So it's quite a weird dynamic to grow up in when it's all about the horses.
Yeah. So I know that you are a big advocate for aspiring young male riders, and I can see how your own background probably really prompted you to do something for others because you could identify in other young people who were coming up into the industry and wanting to do great things what they might be struggling with. So would you tell me a little bit about how you transitioned from the world of competition and what you do now and how that all started?
Yeah. So from horses, a lesson that I always learned was what worked with one horse doesn't work with all horses. You had to try numerous different things to maybe try and get the end result, which actually was, without me even knowing, a good characteristic to learn to be an entrepreneur. And again, something that I sort of fell into. Absolutely, as you touch, it first started with Half Step Performance, which is a male equestrian clothing brand, and in the equestrian industry, there's a huge lack of representation for male riders. I never felt like I could relate to anyone. The clothing that was available was quite feminine. So throughout my whole riding career, I wished I could be riding something that looked a bit like cooler. That if I saw my friends, I wouldn't feel embarrassed wearing in front of them. So it just, without me even knowing, I was coming up with a concept of a clothing brand that it got to a point when I was 21 years old, I had a really nasty fall. Um, Before that, I felt invincible, as probably a young person does. Uh, I'd ride naughty horses. That's what I was renowned for, was maybe having a naughty horse that didn't work in a really top professional yard. As I was trying to make my way to be a top professional, I would take that and try and turn that into something special because it had talent, but maybe that current regime in a really intense environment didn't necessarily work for that horse. Whereas I'm all about more relaxing out in the field more and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, that's how I it came from. Was I had a really nasty fall when I was like, okay, my whole life has always been about horses, but what if I had a fall and I couldn't do horses anymore? I don't have the grades at school. School wasn't for me. So then that really sort of kicked my ass into doing something that maybe I never thought about it, and that was taking a leap in starting half step.
So what exactly are you doing now? Are you running a business that
Yes, yeah,
involves horses and promoting the equestrian industry?
absolutely. So I would say probably I've got multiple businesses, some that are related to the equestrian industry, some aren't. And that's what my day-to-day routine is. Obviously, my first business started with the equestrian industry, which was the clothing. We sort of went into the podcasting industry and the social media side of things in the equestrian world. And then from that, sort of learned that every business has sort of a similar like a similar concept and strategy behind it. And since then, myself and my business partner and co-host and best friend have then sort of expanded into doing different things that aren't necessarily horse related, which I've really enjoyed doing, learning things, lots of stuff involved in the construction industry that we are part of and do, got social media companies, just because obviously with our sort of background in social media, again, we're sort of quite good at growing brands or
Yeah.
personal brands as well. So that's where it all sort of it just I don't know. We sort of see something happening and we will always give it a go. Might not necessarily work. Most of the time it fails, but like we just keep falling upwards.
I don't know if you know, but I spent much of my life in the United States, and I lived in Silicon Valley for a number of years, where it's actually almost a rite of passage to have a failure. And the
Yeah.
way that we tend to look at things in Silicon Valley is that there is no such thing as a failure, only a learning experience, because even a negative experience teaches you how not to do it next time. So even those experiences can be valuable and some good can come out of them. So you're talking very much like any entrepreneur that I might have talked to in Silicon Valley or anywhere in the US, where entrepreneurship is very prevalent and a lot of people do what you do. So great that you've been able to find your way, and the work paradigm is something that really supports individuals these days, and you can do what you love to do. So good for you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
So Josh, something that you touched on that is close to my heart, and you mentioned how it was a little challenging maybe to be a male rider in the equestrian industry and not really feeling that there was as much to cater for your needs. And one of the reasons why I got involved in Mendable is that I do believe that a demographic that can get very missed in the mental health world is adult men, because women are much better than we are at asking for help when they need it, supporting each other. Guys are doing it a lot better now. My kids are in their early 20s and they talk a lot more openly, but I truly believe that the only way that we can break down the stigma is to have these kind of honest conversations. So the fact that you identified that there was a need to support young men in the industry, I'm sure you've got a lot of following, and that must be very rewarding for you to see that you can positively influence a young man and his aspirations.
Absolutely. But a lot of pressure too, because social media happened. It wasn't anything strategic behind it. It was just a real blob up out of nowhere. But that becomes a lot of responsibility that no one's trained for. And then we live in this world now. Some things I believed and thought of when I was 18 are very different to my views as a 27-year-old man, because perspective changes. But I'm held responsible for my views as a 17-year-old, even though I'm a 28-year-old man. Those are the difficulties no one talks about from that. It's not like you're not allowed to make mistakes on there, and I have done. Of course, I have. I'm not perfect by any means, and I'll hold up and apologise if I do. So I've had to learn that I have my own personality, who I am, which is me and my bubble, my fiance, my friends, and then I have a social media personality, and it's completely separate. And it's the only way to do it, and I don't think people talk about it enough. I used to believe people be very fake on social media, and I'm like, I would never, ever, ever show my true life on social media because it's too overwhelming. It becomes too much. It becomes absorbing. It's not healthy. I don't enjoy social media because of what it can do for people, and I think it's a lot of the time it's more detrimental than good because we now use it for very toxic things, and it's so bad, and it is. I think the mental health issue now is so related to our phones and seeing so many things that we believe are amazing. Oh, that relationship looks happier than my relationship that I have. Their house is nicer than my house. That car is nicer than my car. It's just that state of comparison. Like, I'm very big into my ancestral living, and we're supposed to be in communities that are extremely small, so everyone felt they had a role within a community. That's where we come from. That's where we've evolved from. And now we have, within 30 seconds, I could compare myself to millions and millions of people, and I lose my identity because I believe that I should look up to certain role models, and you lose yourself, and you don't even know who you are because you're trying to always be in competition with someone else. So yes, it's brilliant and it's fantastic, and I've now come to a point in my life where I can use social media for good things and when I want to use it, rather than social media dictating me.
Yeah. Yeah. We could probably record a whole episode on the good and the bad of social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And I'll tell you one thing, if we were to sit here and do that a couple of years from now, it'll probably even be a different conversation because the world will be a little bit different then. It's changing
yeah,
very rapidly. Yeah.
absolutely.
So, Josh, I know you play other sports, and in fact, you met our own Sophia May when you were both supporting a charity event in Bristol.
Yeah.
Would you tell me a little bit about the other sports that you like to play?
Yes, so mainly my biggest hobby is gym. Like, it's huge. It's my part of my life. I'm actually going through a very intense training program right now that I've coached for. But also from social media and my fitness, I've sort of in the last 9 months have got involved with celebrity charity football matches, which has been fantastic. A lot of the time I've been playing with celebrity soccer, but recently, as you said, where I met Sophia was at the Battle of Bulls, which was again a fantastic charity Rugby for Heroes we were raising money for. And actually, funnily enough, I've got a golf day, a celebrity golf day that I'm participating in about 2 weeks again for them to raise money for a fantastic charity. But yes, I am constantly trying to do different things. I love my swimming as well. I'm a very active person outside of my. I still ride, but outside my riding, it's part of who I am. I need to be doing. I need to be active. If I stop being active, everything around me crumbles. It's my foundations of me being in a mentally healthy place.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that one of the things I firmly believe is that it's a little bit of a cliche, but healthy mind, healthy body. And if you keep yourself in good shape physically and you do something that is physically demanding, it will put you in a better position to be mentally well. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
I completely agree. I completely agree. The only thing I would personally add to it, and it's only from my own experience, is I use the gym as an excuse not to take care of my mental health. And by that, what I mean is obviously the gym was able to cut because you get that boost, you get that feel good from the gym and being physically active. Um, Sort of hid how much help I needed emotionally, and my lack of emotional maturity that I did have. And I uncovered that in therapy about how I sort of used the gym. It was more, gym became an addiction for me and a coping mechanism. So I ended up actually having an unhealthy relationship with the gym. But yes, I am a huge advocate for taking care of yourself in every way possible with your diet, your nutrition, your gym, your. For me, it's my sauna, it's my ice bath. It's all those things are fundamental for me to be able to be healthy in my mind. And if I stop with one of them, I notice it
Yeah.
massively mentally.
And also, if you take something too far, it can be damaging sometimes than not doing it enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's that balance that you have got to find, and making sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. Like for me now, the foundations of what I do, I could go up without it a day and I'm not going to crumble, but if I don't do it for a week, I know that I'm going to start sliding into a bit of a deep, dark hole.
Another thing I want to also ask you is that obviously you love horses, and having had mental health issues and addressing some of it with physical exercise, how is your relationship with horses? Do you find that being with animals and being with horses particularly is in itself therapeutic for you?
I would say it is for others, and there's some incredible stories that I could tell you about what horses have done for other people. For me, I lost that when it became a career for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I associate the horses now with pressure and intensity that I didn't have the emotional maturity or understanding to be able to deal with. And that's part of my healing process that I've got to go through and I'm still working on right now. And that's fine. And I'm hoping one day that I'll be able to come back to that place where those benefits that I did have as a child, I can have again.
Yeah.
Or maybe it won't, but I will accept that at some point in my life. But there's numerous incredible stories that people can tell for what horses have done for them, and I'm a huge advocate again um, for for that. I've done a lot with an organisation, the Emil Ferret Foundation, which is all about getting inner city children that come from difficult backgrounds out having riding lessons. Which is the stories I could tell you about that are incredible. So unfortunately, not for me, but just because it doesn't work for me right now doesn't mean it's an incredible thing for other people to be part of and involved in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, probably, I'm guessing this is a journey that you'll take with you throughout your life.
Mm, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's something at the end of the day when I eventually do have kids, they'll grow up around horses as well. Because it'll be a very different type of environment around the horses to maybe what I had, but horses will always be part of their lives.
Yeah. So, Josh, where do you go to get inspiration? Is there a person? Is there a role model that you've got somewhere out there, living or dead, that really inspires you?
I used to constantly sort of look up to numerous different people, whether that was Tyson Fury, Mike Tyson, Dennis Rodman, all very unique characters in their own right, and that's what I loved about them is that they could be themselves, and they were unapologetically themselves. Whether they did right or wrong, they were themselves the whole time, and that's what I loved about them as people. But for me now, my inspiration is learning about myself, and that's where I now get my inspiration from is find out who I am in different environments and under different pressure. Can I stick to who I want to be as a person as well? Like my values as a man. What are my values as a man? What do I give out? And that those are the things that I sort of hold myself accountable to, and I take inspiration from myself being able to maybe stick to them when it will be easier not to. For example, getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go to the gym. I get to take inspiration of myself when I'm driving in the car to the gym, knowing that no one else is doing this. Maybe someone is, but I'm telling myself no one else is doing it because I want to feel like I'm gaining that advantage over other people. But that's just me and my psychic and working out how can I play tricks on my own mind to get that little bit of advantage over other people.
Well, I think you're in many ways your own best role model, and things you can learn from yourself, look back on. And one of my huge philosophies in life is don't grow old and live with regrets. Look back on your life and say, I'm so glad I did whatever, rather than I wish I had. So it
Yeah,
sounds like you're doing all the right things. So
like,
Josh, before we wrap up, just one really last question for you is, where do you see yourself going in the future? Do you have a short-term plan, a long-term plan, or should I come back and find out in 5 years' time and maybe you don't know yourself?
I'm going to answer that with a little bit saying I don't know myself, but I believe that life will take me where I need to go. There's certain things that I do want to achieve and want to do, but my path to what I thought I would be doing when I was 18 years old as a professional, potentially international rider is so different to what it is now. But I get as much value from what I do now than what I thought I would do at 18. So some of the big events that have happened in my life to maybe push me in a different path, I couldn't see what direction I was going in. But when I got there, it was a fantastic destination. So I'm a huge believer in just sort of letting life happen.
Yeah.
Whereas before I would have put so much pressure on myself to do things. Whereas actually I work hard and I do everything, but life will take you where life will take you. I'm a huge believer in everything happens for a reason. And the worst moments of my life so far were also the best things that have ever happened to me.
Yeah, I've got a few of those experiences I could share as well. And once again, there's really no such thing as a failure, only a learning experience. So
Yeah.
great that you're on a continual learning path. So Josh, thanks so much for sharing your experiences here and talking about all of the great things you've done and the great things I know you're going to do. And the main thing is that I really give you credit for is that you're making a difference in people's lives, not just people in general, but young people particularly, because any positive influence you can have for anybody, especially somebody who is a little bit less fortunate in life, is such a great thing to do. So congrats on what you're doing and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And thanks everybody for watching. I think you know that we hold the Mendable Room on Mondays and Thursdays, 8 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. East Coast time in North America. So please come along and join us. Below in the narrative, I've put Josh's contact information, social media, so that you'll be able to follow him if you'd like to. And once again, Josh, all the best to you and best of luck.
Thank you, David. Take care.